Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. I had a good day today. I got a chance to get outside since it was a sunny day and near 70 degrees, that is today with the sun. So I did a lot of what I call yard work and did a few other things such as washing my car and cleaning and just doing the things I need to do before it comes spring here, which unfortunately it seems like it's going to be early again this year. So I'm going to be reading from a book that Harry Hoxsey. This will be chapter 10 of his book, and it's called The Mexican Standoff. So I just want you to understand this is important. This issue has been still going on, folks. There are others who've tried to come up with certain, what I call remedies for cancer, and our government is in cohesion with the medical system right along with them. The FDA is all involved with them. Other groups also. So let's get into the meat of the book here. Hope you are doing well today. And here we go. Thank you for being here. Mexican Standoff. While filming at the Tijuana Hoxsey Clinic, we met Fred Walsh, a patient first treated in Dallas in 1958 for cancer of the forehead and nose. He recalled going over to see the now absent former owner, that is Harry Hoxsey. I met him in the Oilman's building on the expressway, and I had quite a visit. I was surprised to find that his office, instead of being filled with oil reports, was filled with filing cabinets. He remembered who I was immediately and went to the files, which I figured were oil leases. Instead, he pulled out my medical records. He wasn't a man you could turn back easily. Hoxsey continued quietly treating a few patients himself on the slide, despite heavy surveillance. The FDA tried to entrap him at least once in 1961, but he cannily evaded the phony request for treatment. Dr. Taylor may have kept using the Hoxsey treatment under the table, and Dr. Joseph Durkee had gone underground with its years before. Harry was wrecked out totally when he had to leave the clinic, Mildred recalled. Remember, Mildred is the head nurse there in Dallas, and she is going to be the head nurse that goes to Tijuana, Mexico. Okay. Physically and mentally very, very distraught about it. His whole life had been spent trying to put this to the people so that they could get well if they wanted to. It took about 3 or 4 years for him to even begin to get his feet on the ground solid. He was bitter because nowhere had he done anything wrong. There was many people across the whole country who were well as a result of it, and he was proud of it. He always said, someday this will be accepted. He never doubted in one moment. Certainly, he thought his whole life had been wrecked out by not being able to go on with it. He was the most miserable person I've ever seen. Hoxsey dispatched Mildred Nelson Cates, C-A-T-E-S, still carrying the name her former husband, on the road, first to Reno, Nevada, and then to Long Beach, California, to work with Dr. Nelson Madison. Mildred sent out a discreet Christmas card to former Hoxsey patients, informing them that the original form of chemotherapy was now being offered in Long Beach. Now, she's using the original form of chemotherapy. It's not chemotherapy, folks, but she's sending this out there in case someone picks it up. Know this will be a shock to all, she wrote to a patient, but we are carrying on in the same old matter. Suggest you contact Harry if any doubt. For Mildred, it was a dawning new game. When I left Dallas around 1959, I was totally lost. I had never thought there'd be a day when I couldn't go next door and say, Harry, what do we do about this or that? I was on my own. It was frightening to have all this responsibility dumped on you all of a sudden. Mildred's recommendations did not go unnoticed, you see. The California state, that is the state people, had the Long Beach office under surveillance. read an FDA internal memorandum, and on checking out the license plates of visitors, people are seeing. You get this idea? This is like they're doing something evil here, folks. These people are trying to save their lives, and the government is in the fucking way. The man never did anything wrong except heal people, which is what a doctor is supposed to do. People leave the premises with brown paper bags in the manner the Hoxsey treatment was distributed in Dallas. The purpose of the broad stake effort is to work up a case under California's new cancer quackery law. Another memo stated that Mildred Cates, one of Hoxsey's former nurses, appears to be the moving spirit behind their enterprise, and we have some evidence that she in turn may be Hoxsey's personal representative. The FDA all started using mail cover, you see, cooperating with the U.S. Post Office to monitor correspondence. The FDA was unable, however, to attain sufficient evidence for prosecution or an injunction, despite being prepared to make the same kind of lengthy and expensive investigation which we had to make in Dallas, if it were necessary to stop duping of the public by Mildred Cates and the osteopath she employs. When Dr. Medicine had a heart attack, Mildred motored to Bountiful, Utah. The state has long been a haven of Hoxsey support because of the Mormon community commitment to the use of herbs as biblical medicines. Mildred said the head of the Mormon church used to send hundreds of patients to Dallas. Utah is today the largest herb-producing state in the country. I'll say that again. The state of Utah is the largest herb-producing state in the country. So, folks, if you live in the United States, maybe you might want to be in that neighborhood if you want to try to save your life in some ways. Working with Dr. Homer Cate, Mildred set up shop in Bountiful in 1962. Once again, the FDA found patients extremely uncooperative in government efforts to bust the clinic. One agent proposed sending his own wife as an informant along with another FDA investigator, since she had non-malignant lumps on her breasts. The FDA collected license plate numbers in the parking lot at the nearby Dreamland Motel and monitored all correspondence. In a mixed-up worthy of the Marx Brothers, at one point the FDA, Bountiful Police, the FBI, and the Army Intelligence discovered each other staked out around the clinic. You got the Army involved, you got the FBI, you got the police local there, and you got the FDA there. What the fuck is going on here, folks? This guy apparently is doing what is right, you see. The Army stated that they were looking for a hot car used by a deserter and had noticed unusual traffic at the remote spot. That's a baloney, folks. The FBI also suspicious of the anomalous activity, surmising it might involve the white slave trade. Really? Give me a break. In Utah, the FDA was superstitiously contacted by J.J. Cates, Mildred's ex-husband, who volunteered to inform on her. A FDA internal memo reported that they had cut him out of the money and he was a fellow to which the saying, misery loves companies, applies. But Cates never showed up for a clandestine airport meeting, leaving word that his mother got sick and he had to leave town. In '62, while visiting Utah, Hoxsey ordered Mildred back to Dallas. She loaded up her car and hit the road, followed by the moving truck transporting the clinic belongings. 5 days after she reached Dallas, the truck finally showed up, accompanied by FDA agents who had sequestered the driver in Salt Lake City and cataloged all the contents. The FDA did try to entrap Mildred. I went down to where we were going to unload in a storage room, Mildred recalled, and as I got out of my car to go over to the building, here comes two this way, two that way, and two from the over there. In other words, they were trying to get her. I said, well, have you boys had a nice trip? They nearly fell over. As the boys were unloading, he asked me, are these your products? And I said, no, they're on the truck that I brought my things on. But as you see, they're bills from Dr. Cate to Dr. Lowell. I'm just a dumb nurse, you see, and there's no way I can buy or sell a vitamin or anything else, and you know it. But they're yours. No, they're not mine. They stood around and they said, don't bother these until we tell you you can. We got everything in the office unloaded there, and I was going out to the house to unload. They followed me to the house and the truck. And here they stand in the way. And finally, I told them, I'm going to tell you something. Either, God damn it, you start unloading furniture or you leave. Either one you want to do, but you've been in the way all day, and I'm tired of it, and I'm moving in right here. So you can tap the phone. You can do any damn thing you want to do, but this is where I live. You see. The FDA seized the misbranded drugs and noted in its report a permanent injunction against Mildred Cates from practicing nursing in Utah. By this time, the outlaw nurse was familiar with the rules of the road, but said she could never get used to the life. Mildred went to work briefly with Dr. Durkee in Dallas, who was by now an alcoholic. It was a disaster. Then Harry Hoxsey called her into his office in the Hoxsey Oil Company. I was the most surprised person you ever saw when he said, "You got it to go from here on. I've gone as far as I can go. They wanted us in Mexico for a long time. Get off your butt and find somebody to help you because these people have got to be taken care of." He was just about that kind about it. He always said things very point blank. Up until then, it was always, well, we'll do this and we'll do that. At that time, it was you. I was at a loss as could be, horrified. Can you imagine having that responsibility dumped in your lap? I couldn't believe it. Then came the bombshell. And he said, one thing I want you to do is drop the Hoxsey name. Change the name. I said, Harry, people won't even know what it is if we do that. No, the problem has been the Hoxsey name. Drop the name and it will be easier for you. Well, I dropped the name, but the patients didn't. It's still to them Hoxsey. On May Day, 1963, Mildred Nelson crossed the border into Mexico. She had been in every other border town from Manamosis to Mexicali, but never in Tijuana. She got a tiny office building near the downtown bull ring. The city was small and personal and started offering the treatment at the Biochemical Research Institute. Later renamed the Biomedical Center, it's moved to another small perch high atop Abilene General Farina. Mildred Bell Nelson now applied to the Mexican authorities for a nursing license and married a Mexican to get working papers. Nurse Mildred Zamario was in business in Mexico. The FDA continued its surveillance of the Hoxsey building thriving in Tijuana, expecting runners to be bringing the medication for distribution on the American side. Agents alerted customs officers and arrested 2 patients at the border. In 1965, the FDA agents and officers of the Sheriff Department posing as patients showed up at the San Diego Singing Wheels trailer park, as undercover agent told Mrs. Edith Crampton. Mildred sent me for my medicine and asked if it was the genuine article. The unsuspecting resident replied that it was the real thing and that my husband had been cured of cancer with it. Mrs. Crampton was immediately arrested by police descending from all directions. They found only the 1 bottle of tonic in an exhaustive search. Mrs. Crampton then became very uncooperative. The FDA report stated and refused to answer additional questions. The search lasted approximately 1.5 hours, and Mrs. Crampton spent the majority of this time loudly reading from the Bible and singing hymns. Another arrest was made later at the trailer park. Then Mildred's ex-husband, the duplicitous Johnny Cates, turned up again, offering to help the FDA entrap her. On 2 years probation for a customs violation, he was looking to lighten his sentence, you see. Cates informed the agents that a German physician friend of Hoxsey's, that is Dr. Schultz, was now handling diagnosis and physical exams. Mildred lives in Tijuana and rarely crosses the border. Cates went on. He displays stolen receipt books and confided that Mildred flatly refused to ship drugs either via mail or common carrier. He added that Mildred paid off a Mexican health inspector $100 a month. According to the FDA memo, Cates suggested that the easiest way to close a clinic would be to offer the local health inspector more money than he received from Mildred. Another approach would be to the arrest of Mildred by customs officials at the border in a car containing non-declared drugs. Johnny Cates was certain Mildred would not cross the border even under an emergency situation to treat a patient. He did say, however, that he personally might be able to induce her to cross the border in a car with the Hoxsey medicine for a big sale on the side. It never happened. Mildred settled comfortably in Tijuana. She especially liked being able to double park without consequences. She found the medical community welcoming and open. Patients began to come to the biomedical center, but to them it was still Hoxsey. In 1967, Medical World News, a prominent AMA publication, ran a sensational piece on the new spate of Tijuana clinics, featuring a photo of nurse Mildred Zambrano. Cancer victims set a seemingly scene. Why in the world would our government be involved there? You get it, folks? You see, these people don't want you to be healed. You get it? Like most Mexican border towns, Tijuana is a place where gringos come to cut loose. Pandering to this fact, men and boys swarm along the Aviaria Revolution, usually offering an astounding varieties of wares and services. Depending on taste and need, the visitor can buy cheap liquor, a quickie marriage or divorce, marijuana, or a pornography movie. But one other item blatantly offered in Tijuana has nothing to do with pleasure. It's cancer treatments, with a variety of preparations and regimens that have been discredited or legally banned in the U.S. are available in a number of storefronts, clinics scattered among the town's scrubby streets. For desperate Americans who've confirmed or imagined it's cancer, Tijuana is the end of the line. A statuesque red-haired Aryan, Mrs. Zambrano, used to be chief nurse at the Dallas clinic run by Harry Hoxsey, whose cancer remedy first appeared in the early 1920s and managed to survive a succession of exposures by medical authorities over the years. He lasted for over almost 40 years, folks, but he was always dodging the government, the FDA, and the AMA too. If the purple prose has a familiar ring to it, it should come as no surprise. The editor of Medical World News in 1966-67 was Dr. Morris Fishbein. Following a spell in Europe after he was disposed by the AMA, he returned to resume a illustrious career as a medical writer and professor at the University of Chicago. Wow. They would take anything at the University of Chicago, wouldn't they? You see, that tells you something there, folks. Several of his popular books, co-author of 27 and editor of 16, remain in print today, and the chair at the University of Chicago memorizes his name. He died a reverent figure at the age of 87 in 1976. Dr. Fishbein's legacy of quack busting proved to be eminently durable. By the mid-1960s, the Hoxsey and Koch treatments had been permanently driven out of the United States. Dr. Lincoln's treatment disappeared from view, as did at least a dozen other promising unorthodox cancer therapies that never got a scientific investigation. Only Dr. Ivy kept up the fight. A featherweight boxing champion in the Army, he was not one to quit. In 1963, the FDA conducted a test of cryobiosine by analyzing its chemistry. The agency identified it as a creatine monohydrate, amino acid present in all animal tissue and without value in the treatment of cancer. Other FDA laboratory analysis claimed it to be nothing more than mineral oil. See, Father, you got to realize here, they're not going to tell you the truth, you see. They're playing games here. The National Cancer Institute committee of 24 experts reviewed 504 case records and found unanimously that cricopazine was worthless. The FDA followed with a 49-count federal indictment for fraud and conspiracy against Dr. Ivy and his compatriot, Dr. Steven Duravit, and his brother, a business manager. Because the drug was unapproved, its interstate distribution was illegal. Now, see, let me explain something about how this works, how the law works here, folks. The FDA has no power if you have an office in a state. Follow me? So if you want to come there and get a product in the state, let's just say, for example, here in South Carolina, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? See, the federal government is not dealing with what we call state issues. It's dealing with what we call interstate, meaning a crossing the state lines. And this is how the FBI gets involved. I know this because simply is that the business I worked for, we were robbed one time, and they stole checks. And what they did was simply is they crossed the Georgia line, and that's how they caught these people. So they caught these people because they stepped over the state line. If not, There'd have been only simply what we call a SLED would have been involved here, was the South Carolina Law Enforcement Department here, administration. So this is how they do it. Okay, this is how to set it up. So if you live in North Carolina or Georgia, the only way you're going to be able to get that product is you're going to have to be able to come to South Carolina to get it. So you're going to have to use a car or a train, but probably the car is probably the most private at that time to get that product. So the whole idea simply is that if you are sent something by mail, it's over, just like that. You see. Okay, so cryobiazine advocates turned out in great numbers to block the door to the FDA commissioner office with vocal sit-ins. 11 U.S. senators called for another investigation of the promising drug, but the FDA rejected the plea, saying data from tests conducted in animals was totally inadequate to justify FDA approval to test cryobiazine in humans. Folks, they never did any of this. They didn't. They're being paid for by the AMA, folks. They're bought. Defendants were acquitted on all counts. Dr. Ivy, then 72-year-old, vowed he would wait until the smoke of battle clears before seeking another test. I have no regrets because I have seen a lot of people relieve of pain in their lives apparently prolonged by the use of this drug. I have no regrets because my first objective as a scientist is to hang on to this theory and the existence of an anti-cancer substance in the bodies of all multicellular animals and all medical cellular plants. A coded reference endorsing Hoxsey's herbs after all. Dr. Ivy remained philosophical to the end. When you come forward with a committee opinion to kill a scientific theory or destroy scientific observation, you're living in the past, in the dark ages of the medicine. It's high time that when something new comes on the horizon, which apparently is going to prolong life or alleviate suffering, we should all get together and work on it to try to decrease the scientific lag. Following a national television airing of a high-profile special about Ivy's struggle, cryobiazine simplifies Reverend Virgil A. Kraft preached to the Chicago congregation. Man's deadliest cancer is the selfishness of any man or any group of men who tremble at the prospect of putting any investigation or discovery which might benefit mankind to a fair test, simply because such a test might cost them a little prestige, a little power, or a little money. Other Ivy supporters were considerably less kind in the assessments of the ADA. They estimated the cost of the criminal trial alone at over $1 million, with a total of $20 million spent by organized medicine to prevent cryobiazine tests over the 15-year ordeal. It's a lot of money, taxpayers' money, folks. As Ivy's support group wrote, there have been displayed in the whole of this sordid transaction a wondrous of additional persecutions and ruffling like ferocity by the United States Attorney, rarely incident to the most depraved and abjurial of our species. On an indictment, admittedly grounds on vicious, illegal, and unconstitutional procedures involving spurious and fake letters by inspectors of the FDA. Spurious and fake clinical records of imaginary cancer victims by unscrupulous physicians, deliberately manufacturing in concert conspiracy with the scalawags of the Food and Drug Administration to entrap, to ensnare the proponents of cryobiazine, to allege manufacturing felonies. The United States Attorney General put on a trial Dr. Andrew C. Ivy, Dr. Stefan Duray, and Dr. William F. P. Phillips. The purpose of this trial was not really to legally convict these great scientists, but to bankrupt them financially and spiritually. Yeah, this is what happened to Dr. Hoxsey. They destroyed him spiritually, folks. He got a lot of energy by simply helping people. No one has that power, folks. No man has the right to rule over another man. And we're going to have to get this shit together, folks, because that is the problem. The government doesn't have the right to rule over anybody. The problem is simply we've lost our ability to understand that we are the authority, not them. That's the fucking problem. And until people really come to that senses, it's going to be hell on earth, you see, because we don't need anybody to tell us what to do. You see, we can make up our own mind. We don't need a daddy or a mommy. You get it? So Duravit, whose health was destroyed by the tribulations, immigrated to Switzerland. Dr. Ivy continued working through the Ivy Cancer Research Foundation on Carcasson, as he now called it, supported by wealthy and prominent allies. Creole Biozine disappeared with Dr. Ivy's death a decade later in 1977. When Mildred Nelson went into exile in Tijuana, Harry Hoxsey stayed in Dallas. As his son told me, he was from a different era. He lived 3 lives in one. At the end, he was like a worn-out car. Everything just broke down at once. After suffering a heart attack in 1958, he was never fully well again. A teetotaler, he nevertheless remained a confirmed steak and potatoes man and a smoker. James Burke remained close with him after Harry finally was driven out of business into retirement. He was such a restless, driving man that he could not be happy in retirement. He developed cancer of the prostate. He refused to see a surgeon and he applied his own medicine, believing thoroughly that he was going to cure himself. He did it a long time and he did not cure himself. Finally, his wife took him to the surgeon and they operated on him, but it was too late to make him well. He lingered on about 7 years as an invalid in bed. He contradicted his main thesis as he told his patients, don't let them doctors cut on you because they won't cure you. I never asked him what he thought about having taken the tonic for himself. He never told me he tried to cure himself. His wife told me. He kept his counsel to himself. I would say if you asked me to venture a guess that he went to his grave believing in it because it didn't work with everybody. He probably thought, well, it didn't work with me, but it worked on others. I'm just the unlucky one it didn't work on. He was rather bitter at the doctors who operated on him. There was some suspicion in his mind that because he was Harry Hoxsey, the high priest of quacks in their view, that they deliberately cut a little too much on him. I never believed that. Then James Burke faced an existential test of fire. Consequently, I developed the exact same cancer. When Harry being like a brother to me all these years, I discussed it with him. He kept his counsel to himself. But day after day, I bring it up and I say, Harry, what should I do? He never once told me to take his pills or his medicine. Finally, one day I said, Harry, they're going to give me a maximum of 2 years and I've got to decide. What you say? He thought for a long time and said, Jimmy, go let them son of bitches cut it out. See, he become his heart. He got broken. His heart, he gave up. Do you see that? Harry Hoxsey then closed the curtain on the Shakespeare Fifth Act, as Burke recalled. After I had my cancer and was cured, I arranged to have my doctor, who is one of the most famous neurologists of the world, he called on to go to Tokyo, Brazil, to attend Hoxsey, and that was Hoxsey's last doctor record. Dr. Paul Peters told me that Hoxsey was free of cancer, but Hoxsey had a weak heart, and he was an aging man, and he couldn't last very long. I pinned my doctor down. He said it was liver trouble and a weak heart. He stated over and over that Hoxsey was free of cancer, and this man came to his house and treated him about every other day. Hoxsey died when this doctor was away, Burke commented. He could not be called to sign the death certificate. An unknown doctor from the phone book or called by the nurse who knew nothing about the case. Somebody had to sign a death certificate to get the body out of the room into the morgue. The doctor looked at his record and the chart and he saw radical surgery carcinoma. This new man wrote on the death certificate, carcinoma prostrate. You see, when my doctor returned and I told him about this, he said, this is not correct. I attended Hoxsey the day before he died, and I'm surprised he lived through the night. His heart was failing him at the time, and he died of heart failure in old age. Please have somebody send that to me, and that's what I want to write on it. I'm his doctor of record. It's clear that Hoxsey did not die of cancer at all. Whether his own tonic together with surgery cured him, or whether the tonic cured him, or whether the surgery, who knows? I verified Burke's assertions in a personal interview with Dr. Paul Peters, who confirmed that Hoxsey did not have cancer when he died, but he never corrected the death certificate. While he was on his deathbed, Burke recollected philosophically, I was tempted to tell him that his pills and his tonics were no good, that he was curing people with his own power and magnetism, making them cure themselves. I wanted to tell him how he cured them like Jesus Christ did. I never did tell him because I wanted to be sure myself. Now, as time goes by, looking back, maybe his medicine his herbs and nostrums, maybe they did cure. He was only using derivatives of what Indians made cures from and what the ancient Greeks used. I'm glad now I didn't tell him, because just maybe Harry was way ahead of his time, and he had a cure or some part of a cure for cancer. I can never be sure how he did it. One thing is certain from my viewpoint: he did make people well from cancer. Bert paused, sighed, and recalled a rueful exchange he shared with his dying friend. On his deathbed, I went to see him every other day, or sometimes twice a day, and we talked about old friends and old times and good times and bad times. Harry would suddenly get a far away look in his eye, and he'd say, "Jimmy, we could have beat them son of a bitches." Now, Jimmy was the guy who had him run for office, remember, for governor of the state of Texas. As we filmed the Pointing Remembrance with James Burke, his wife, Angela joined us, a stately silver-haired woman in an azure dress. She too had a story. I first met Harry in May of 1955. My husband and I, 3-year-old son, and I were returning from living in Germany for many years. Harry and his wife invited us to stay with them when we first came in Dallas. We did for a time until Harry helped us find an apartment. He was most kind and gracious, and so was his wife. That fall, after we got settled in, there came a call from my mother, who had just been diagnosed as having uterine cancer. She was very upset and very worried. She wanted to know what we thought about his coming down here and having the Hoxsey treatment. I didn't want to give her recommendations to absolutely come or absolutely don't come. I felt she had to make up her own mind about that. What she didn't say was that the doctor had told my father and one of her sisters that he expected her to live only about 6 months, or at the very most, a year. That part she didn't know. She did decide to come down here and have the Hoxsey treatment. She was here for about 3 weeks. She went home with her medication and did come back some months later for a checkup. By that time, she was well on her way to recovery, according to the doctors here at Hoxsey Clinic. She did not have any further serious health problems, and certainly no recurrence of cancer until 1980, 25 years later, when she then developed a malignant brain tumor. Don't you think, Angela, Jim asked, turning to his wife, that the irony, if not the tragedy, of our old friend Harry Hoxsey was that in his last days there was no Harry Hoxsey to minister to Harry Hoxsey. Yes, he had been there for so many people throughout his lifetime. He certainly was there for my mother, for hundreds and probably thousands of other people, but there was nobody there for him. Largely forgotten, Harry Hoxsey was buried in Dallas by a small clutch of family and friends just before Christmas in 1974. He died without an obituary in the Dallas papers. Yet, even his death, Harry Hoxsey was marked by a conflict of medical opinion. So, the test that Harry Hoxsey saw never happened. It would be another several years after his burial before our film and other independent researchers could pick up the trail and participate for the first time a serious look into medicines that Hoxsey claimed could cure cancer. The findings would be startling. So that's the last chapter of the book here. That is, and then I'm going to take a little sweet breath, because this is a part 2 of this particular book. Will be the conflict of medical opinion. It's the Hoxsey remedies versus conventional cancer treatments. There's a quote here I want to read here. I think it's critical. What is a weed? By plants whose virtues have not yet been discovered. Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's key, folks. We think everything in our yard is sometimes a weed, but maybe it's not a weed. Remember, Scripture in Genesis states that simply, I give you the seeds and all the herbs and fruits to basically keep yourself healthy here on this planet. The problem simply is that very few people have actually done any research on a lot of these herbs. I did post something the other day, actually last night, that I found. I thought was very critical. If I can find it here, maybe not. Yes, I have it here. Let me give you the information so you can go to it, because it's pretty startling what the information I found, which is actually at the end of this particular book. It's the American Botanical Council. The title of the article is Temptus in a Tonic Bottle, a Bunch of Weeds. It's issue 49. The page number is 32 to 43. The author is the same one who is Kenneth Aschubel. It's Ausubel, and he's goes in and he actually goes to work, goes visit a particular person near Washington D.C. His name was James Duke, a PhD, a renowned botanist and author of 20 books and over 200 scientific articles. He's devoted his professional life to the study of pharmacology, the branch of pharmacy that develops medicines from natural sources. At the time, Dr. Duke worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where he found a world-class database on plant medicine. He also collaborated for many years with the National Cancer Institute as part of a modest government program for drug discovery from natural products, including plants. Along with a small handful of other botanical explorers, Duke helped lead the way to plant medicines that have produced pharmaceutical drugs such as the cancer drug as called Taxol, Taxol, from the Pacific yew tree, yew tree. During this period, the NCI repeatedly screened about 10% of the plant species of the world, including all those in the Hoxsey formula. I sent Duke the revised list of Hoxsey's herbs that were published in the 1950s, with Mildred Nelson ostensibly continued to use. Duke decided to tap not only the only exclusive USDA database, but also the NAPR-ALERT, the Natural Product Alert Computer Database at the University of Illinois in Chicago, founded by Dr. Norman Farnsworth, F-A-R-N-S, Worth, W-R-T-H, a global reverend pharmacologist, that is, gathers data from scientific and medical studies all over the world on plants and other natural substances and collates them into a comprehensive, centralized information source. It can sort this data into multiple categories of chemical properties and biological activities, a task ideally suited to computers working with gargantuan volumes of information. When I arrived at USDA headquarters in Beltsville, Maryland, Duke shuttled me to the nearby herbal vineyard, the same small farm where he lives. A tall gentleman figure sporting a trim coatee, he spoke in gentle southern tones with understanding authority. Guiding me around the lush eastern deciduous forest, he delighted to pointing out a number of Hoxsey's herbaceous weeds growing in his own backyard. We inspected red clover, burdock, that's B-U-R-D-O-C-K, prickly ash, barberry, B-A-R-B-E-R-Y, poke, P-A-P-O-K-E, and buckthorn, as well as bloodroot, herbs in one of the Hoxsey's external formulas. Duke noted that all of Hoxsey's herbs have a long, empirical tradition of Native Americans' uses for cancer, several stretching back as far as 3,000 years. Some of the herbs, such as red clover and burdock, which were introduced into North America from Europe during the 1700s, were immediately adopted by the Indians. So let's just get to the clear point here, folks. This guy states it very clearly that these particular herbs do work. It depends only the problem is simply how long have you been sick with the cancer. But he says a long empirical tradition over, this is amazing, as far back as 3,000 years ago, folks. And there are others out there that are basically keeping you from actually healing yourself, because it's all because of money and probably what I call pride. And frankly, they don't know any better. Duke's first concern about the tonic was his safety, and he quickly pointed out that the only one of the herbs would be poke root, P-O-K-E root, might be dangerous. A common plant throughout the Southeast, poke is a well-known herb and food to local residents who like to parboil, that is P-A-R, their leaves and add them to salads. The root, the berry, and the leaf are toxic in large quantities. The amount in the Hoxsey tonic, however, is well below any threshold of danger. Back in Duke's study, stacked high with books, papers, and oversized reference works, he lifted a hefty 3-pound volume called simply Plants Used Against Cancer. The encyclopedia tome was authored by Jonathan Hartwell, H-A-R-T, Well, W-E-L-L, a chemist and virtual founder of the National Cancer Institute, who went on to become an assistant chief of the NCI Cancer Chemotherapy National Service Center and head of the National Product Section of the NCI Drug Research and Development Program. Hartwell spent many years compiling a comprehensive cross-reference of information on the global folklore of traditions of anti-cancer plants. The history of the herbal treatment of cancer, he wrote, is synonymous with the history of medicine, indeed of civilization, covering more than 3,000 species. Hartwell's compilation listed all of the Hoxsey herbs. They range from having 3 to over 30 citations each. A very impressive score, Duke noted. A number of the plants, Duke pointed out, contain chemical compounds of considerable interest to the NCI. At least 3 of the herbs, that is barberry, cascarero, sangrario, and buckthorn, contain compounds that have been studied by the Cancer Institute as effective in some tumor systems. They're not studied in humans, so there are certainly biological active compounds in these species. The data that Duke provided was sorted into several categories that indicate both the nature of the test performed and their relevance to possible anti-cancer activities. One grouping was for antioxidants, which protect cells in the body against pre-cancerous damage. Another was for what they call anti-mutagenicity properties, which shield against cellular mutations that can lead directly to cancer. A third was called cytotoxic activity, which is a toxic action that can kill any cells, but is particularly effective at killing cancer cells since they are more sensitive by virtue of dividing so quickly. Another class of activity was antimicrobial, that is antiseptical, consisting of both antibacterial and antiviral activity. Antibacterial properties are considered indicative of potential anti-tumor activities, while antiviral activities is important because some cancers are now believed to be caused by viruses, as Hoxsey asserted it in the late 1950s. Dr. Duke ultimately wrote a short article based on his Hoxsey research that is published in 1988 in what we call Herbal Gram, H-E-R-B-A-L, capital G-R-A-M, the peer-reviewed journal of the respected American Botanical Council. 8 of the 9 herbs in the internal tonic showed anti-tumor activity in controlled laboratory animal tests. 5 showed antioxidant properties as protective against cancer. All showed antimicrobial properties with activities against viral or bacterial infections. Duke's assessment was that the Hoxsey internal tonic ingredients showed very significant chemical and biological anti-cancer activity. The formulation might or might not add, but in principle it defined merits serious investigation. In preparing this book, I revisited the initial 1985 herbal sleuthing began by Jim Duke. To learn that new data might have come online, I consulted him with Duke as well as with several other researchers who have conducted independent investigations into Hoxsey and what turned into a medical detective story. One of these was Francis Brinker, B-R-I-N-K, a naturopath, physician, and scholar of botanical medicine who made his own visit to the Biomedical Center in 1983. Brinker significantly published a definite article on the Journal of Naturopathic Medicines containing surprising conclusions about Hoxsey's tonic. Another one was a lady named Patricia Spain Ward, a PhD, a esteemed medical historian who prepared a contract report on Hoxsey for the Federal Office of Technological Assessment, the former research arm of Congress. The alarming episode of Ward's controversial report is told in chapter 17. We won't get there now, we'll see. But anyway, finally, the American Botanical Council Executive Director, Mark Blumenthal, supplied the most current update on these Hoxsey herbs from the NAPTO alert, that is, voluminous data filling 267 tightly spaced pages that Dennis McKinley, PhD, a prominent pharmacologist, reviewed and appraised. Before we look at these herbs, however, it's necessary to probe the mystery surrounding the secrecy of Hoxsey's formula. The list of ingredients originally provided by Jim Duke was the one published on Hoxsey's book in 1956. That formula contained barberry, buckthorn, bark, burdock root, Cassiocaria sagrario, licorice root, poke root, prickly ash, red clover blossoms, and stinging root in water based with potassium iodine. However, Hoxsey had previously given two different versions. Also, that is, after keeping his cosmetolic composition secret for 25 years, he first released it only under court order during the 1949 Hearst trial. Several years later, Hoxsey listed on his labels yet another recipe almost identical to one published in his book. In court depositions, Hoxsey admitted changing the formula over time, starting out with the original inheritance, but significantly augmenting it under the direction of Dr. Joseph Durkee from 46 to 52. Dr. Durkee saw himself as a serious researcher knowledgeable in traditional osteopathic and naturopathic medicines. Hoxsey readily admitted that Dr. Durkee contributions, but he never specified what they were. Hoxsey's remaining casual as to whether any of these were the true formula. Pharmaceutical companies have always been notorious and justified with secrecy about their recipes and manufacturing techniques until they gain patience. Even then, such commercial interests remain evasive, like Coca-Cola and his famous secret formula. Because Hoxsey herbal remedies were not patentable, he had reason to be cautious. Perhaps Hoxsey felt, as Winston Churchill once remarked, that the truth was so valuable that it had to be protected by a bodyguard of lies. So the question remains as to what exactly is in the Hoxsey tonic. Mildred Nelson, that is Harry Hoxsey's valuable nurse and assistant, has continued to hold the precise recipe close to the best and never confirm or deny its makeup. She gave a sly wink that Hoxsey might have admitted under court order only what the AMA believed to be in the tonic. However, botanical formulas containing multiple ingredients are famously complex, and analytical methods of the day and understanding of plant chemistry were primitive. Mildred did hint to us that licorice may never have been in the formula after all, and has remained altogether opaque about the contents. In the last few years, she elliptically stopped listing buckthorn and prickly ash bark on the label. She also maintains that the tonic formula may be customary according to the type of cancer and stages, as Hoxsey also claimed to do. As a naturopath scholar, Francis Brinkley delved deeply into the old literature of what we call the elected medical tradition after attending the National College of Naturopathic Medicine in Portland, Oregon. His fascination with the rich heritage of the elected physicians of the 19th century set him on an extensive review of their botanical remedies, where he would eventually make a puzzling discovery about the Hoxsey tonic. The name Eclectically, originally was a group of doctors devoted to clinical research and the use of herbal preparations in treating diseases. They flourished in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and between 1826 to 1939 had a string of medical schools that taught sophisticated methods of botanical prescribing. The mainstay of the therapies of that era. Their work represented the apex of plant medicine in the United States and persisted as a rich reservoir of practical knowledge, such of which has yet to be equal. They were able to differentiate well the activities of various plants. The erudited researcher notes, but more importantly, they were effectively clinical observers. They could tell what worked and what didn't. Even though their results were positive, their explanations were very often wrong, based on limitation of understanding of medicine and science of that time. They had an empirical approach to medicine, which it is clinical results that one looks for, not the absolute guarantee of understanding the process involved. They were willing to use anything that worked. In fact, conventional medicine eventually incorporates that philosophy, what we call eclecticalism, using clinical results and observations, which today are established through controlled double-blind studies. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to take a break on this particular video. And I'll be going into another particular video in a little bit here. If you have questions, this is, I'm not saying you, how do I say this? I have one of his books. I want to share that here. I don't see it now. I had it here earlier. I'm always moving my books around here, trying to find them here. But It's just important that basically we understand that Harry Hoxsey, what I understand, he had the formula, folks. But you know, he lived to do this, folks. He lived. But when they shut him down, they destroyed him. His whole life changed. You see, his heart was set on helping people, folks. And when somebody comes along and stops that, you can no longer do that anymore. Even though he was well, it wasn't what I call well educated, but he had money. He was in the oil business too, folks. Most people are not aware of that. He had money, so he was not poor. He could have quit that. You see, he could have quit his job at Hoxsey Clinic. But see, he thrived off of that, you see, because his dad gave him the responsibility to do this. And he followed his dad and that, and he followed him very well. He never sold the remedy. He came close, but he never gave it away. And he fought for it to provide it because he knew that it worked. He was guaranteed by that. And he also understood, basically, when he knew that, he had a positive attitude towards his patients. And with that, which can only mean that even more success can take place. And that's critical. He had the attitude that basically was a good salesman. He fit the position in what he did. And he was willing to basically die for what he did, you see. And folks, he didn't make the money that he could have made. Yes, he made money. If he didn't make money, he couldn't pay for his nurses. He couldn't pay for his doctors. He couldn't have had anything. You have to make profits, folks. You can't just simply, you got to run a business. But he was willing to fight it in order to set up that there would be one day that people would be able to heal themselves for themselves, you see. So we'll be back with this hopefully tonight. I appreciate you being here, and you take care and have a good night.